Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each of the episodes against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 1, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happens within this episode. So there's several different plot lines that kind of intersect within this episode. The first patient plot line is that Joe, who is the bartender across the street, passes out in the bar. Everyone who works at the hospital basically brings him across the street to be checked out. It's found that he has an aneurysm that Derek needs to clip, but because of its location, he can't reach it without almost guaranteeing him dying. So what they decide to do is a standstill operation, which is essentially where they cool down the body, drain the blood, and basically have him temporarily die while the surgery takes place before bringing him back afterwards. And then due to his financial situation as the bar owner, it's obviously a successful business, but also he doesn't have insurance, and this type of surgery is hundreds of thousands, which he does not have. And George decides to go out of his way to help him, and basically for the 45 to 17 minutes that he is dead, he basically donates the body to science, which gives him a grant, which then allows Joe to pay for the surgery without having to actually pay out of pocket. And George does this while he is supposed to be spying for Richard, who is post-surgery from the last episode when he had his brain surgery. We now have George acting as his spy, but despite the fact that George does find out a lot of information, he refuses to tell Richard, as that's not really in his nature, and instead he's spent most of the day working on Joe to try to make sure that he can keep his bar, as the bar is important to multiple people who work at the hospital. We then, of course, have the Meredith plot, which is Addison, who is Derek's wife, who was teased in the last episode, came in the last 2 minutes of the episode, is here in this episode, and she basically, Meredith went to the bar after she showed up. Her and Derek have a conversation. Derek's not really open to talking to her and is upset that she's there. She promises she's not there to try to win him back, but is actually there for work, and she has taken on a pediatric case with two twins who share the same placenta, and one of them is not getting enough blood, whereas the other one is getting most of the blood. And so she's going in to do a surgery to basically even that out to make sure that both twins have a healthy amount of blood supply, and she's one of the few surgeons who are able to do it, which is why Richard asked her to come. And she specifically requests Meredith as her intern on the case. However, the mother of the twins is in a similar situation in which her husband cheated on her and then ultimately left her for another woman after 15 years of marriage and after she had gotten pregnant with these twins. So she at first does not like Meredith. However, by the end of the episode, Addison sets the record straight that she was the one who cheated on her husband, and Meredith is the wronged party here, as she was not aware. We then, of course, have the Christina plot for this episode, which is that she helps out on the standstill surgery, and Burke asks her for dinner to go out for dinner. She rejects him at that time. They then meet in an on-call room, and he asks her what she wants to do. She says she doesn't know, and he then basically tells her to figure it out. Not an on-call room, sorry, that was in the stairwell. George overheard. And then Christina confides in Meredith that she is pregnant, but doesn't really go into details, which upsets Meredith. She's like, why did you even tell me if you're not even going to give me all the details, especially after she finds out about Burke, because Christina's given her flack for dating Derek. Meanwhile, she's been sleeping with Burke, who is also an attending at the same level. Burke then goes into a conversation with Richard, where Richard talks about how they're both career focused, and he then, when Christina goes into the on-call room to talk to him about their relationship, and it seems like she also is getting ready to tell him about the baby, he instead decides to break up with her. And then later at the bar, she basically confides in Meredith and confirms that Meredith is her person in the case of like emergency that she put down for her appointment at the clinic to abort the baby. And this, of course, is a touching scene, and Meredith is also touched by being considered Christina's person. We then also have George, again, becomes a spy, goes the extra mile for Joe. And then we kind of have a relatively minor plot that kind of goes through where we can kind of see Izzy reevaluating how she feels about Alex. Like, she's been someone who obviously they've butted heads in the past. She's called him evil sponge. She does not like him. She doesn't even think that he's human in most cases. And of course, he kind of lets her do that because he is pretty harsh and he doesn't necessarily care about patients in the same way that she does. But when it's somebody that he does care about, he does show a more human side, a more caring side. And this is what Izzy starts to see, especially in relation to how he treats Joe. He even hugs George at the end for helping Joe to keep his bar and thanks him for it. And while there's not anything that's happening in the episode, we are starting to see her reevaluating her opinion of him. And that, in a nutshell, is this episode. So now that I've rewatched the episode, it's time to rank the episode on our ranking lists. As a reminder, we have our mostly objective ranking, which is based on set values, and then our personal ranking, which is based more on the emotional opinion of the episode. And so we're going to start with our mostly objective rank values. And we'll start with our +1, which is our single episode supporting character introduction. And this is Julia, or sorry, not Julia, Julie, Julie Phillips, who is a patient of the hospital. She is pregnant with twins. Addison is brought in to do a surgery on her twins in utero, and she is the one whose husband left her and cheated on her shortly after she found out she was pregnant. We then have our multi-episode supporting character introduction, which is worth 2 points, and this is for Joe. Joe does recur throughout multiple seasons, however, he only does a few episodes throughout those seasons, and ultimately, apart from this episode, is more of a character that you see on occasion when they go to the bar because he owns the bar across the street. So even though he does have multiple seasons of episodes, the number of episodes that he's in, because they are few and they tend to be somewhat far between, especially later when he recurs, I'm just considering him a multi-episode supporting character rather than a multi-season supporting character, which again is the 2 points. We then have our sporting relationship development, which is of course between Derek and Addison. Because we are rewatchers, we know that Derek does choose Meredith and they end up quite happy together. They are the main relationship for Derek. However, obviously he is already married, and that is why this is still considered a supporting relationship between Derek and Addison. And this supporting relationship development, of course, is Addison's arrival, the hints at the beginning of the episode that there was more to it than just him running off to go sleep with somebody else, that there was actually an event which prompted his escape. And she also makes a point to say that she isn't there to chase him, but she's there for work, and that Richard had asked her to come. We then, of course, later on have Addison requesting Meredith to be her intern on her case. And then while she's on the case, obviously, this brings back bad memories for Julie, who is her patient, who then brings up that she doesn't necessarily want to work with Meredith because of the fact that she slept with somebody else's husband. But this is when Addison then sets the record straight and tells her that she's the one who cheated on Derek, not the other way around, and that Meredith is the wronged party within their relationship. And then, kind of as an aside, we hear from Derek to Meredith exactly what that past incident is, but I'll go more into detail on that when I speak about their relationship, because that conversation does take place between Meredith and Derek. We then also have, kind of as an aside to that, the fact that Izzy is starting to reevaluate her opinion of Alex. I believe they will become a supporting relationship briefly in the series, but it is briefly, and therefore will be a supporting relationship, but there isn't enough yet to really call it a relationship, and so I'm honorably mentioning them under this category, but they aren't applying any points for this category, at least at this time. Next up, we of course have our multi-season supporting character, and this is Addison. Now, the reason I'm considering her a supporting character instead of a main character is that while she is in every episode of the early seasons that she's in at the start of Grey's Anatomy, she's only in the series for a brief time before she gets her own spin-off, and she's basically brought in to serve a specific purpose, and once that purpose has been fulfilled, that is when she goes off and does her private practice, which is the spin-off series. Therefore, to me, because she has a specific purpose in being there, she's only there long enough to fulfill that purpose, and then, she moves on. That is why I consider her supporting rather than main, even though she will be in pretty much all of the episodes in some capacity over the next couple of seasons. And that is worth 3 points. And then we, of course, have the impactful or memorable moment, line, etc., which is, of course, the fact that Christina makes Meredith her person. And this is a very iconic and memorable event for me, at least, in the series. I've mentioned before how the medical side of the show isn't necessarily what interests me about the show. It's always been the drama between the characters, the relationships, romantic and otherwise. And Meredith and Christina, I think, have a very memorable and iconic friendship throughout the time that Christina was in the show. And one of the main things that recurs throughout their friendship is the fact that they are each other's person. Even when they go off and be in other relationships, they still consider each other their person. And this is the first episode where Christina is acknowledging that she has made Meredith officially her person on the clinic forms for her future appointment. And that is also why she confided in Meredith about the pregnancy that she has. And that, of course, was worth 3 points, which brings us up to 11. However, there were some negatives for this episode, first of which was, of course, our negative messaging or behavior. First off, we have the fact that Derek has lost Chief to Burke for essentially sleeping with an intern. However, we also know as an audience that Burke is sleeping with Christina, and not only that, he got her pregnant. And really the only difference between him and Shepard in this respect or regard is how many people know about them, which in the case of Burke and Christina, they did a much better job of keeping it a secret. That's a minor one, though. The other one, of course, is Addison bringing Meredith in as an intern, which I kept here, but this isn't what brings the points in, because honestly, we find out later that Addison doesn't necessarily have bad intentions. I mean, obviously, given the situation, her specifically requesting Meredith comes off a bit suspicious at the start, but then her later defense of Meredith with regards to the patient, I feel like kind of forgives that, in that she didn't necessarily have poor intentions, maybe more out of a curiosity than anything else. And then we, of course, have, Christina still not telling Burke about the fact that she's pregnant. And then she gets broken up with by Burke, who assumes like she's not truly interested or invested in a relationship with him. And he's also career focused as an individual. And I feel like had she told him about the baby ahead of time, had he known about it, had he known that that's why she was pulling away, why she was, maybe more distant because she was dealing with this and trying to work out what she was going to do and confirming the decision that she had already made, that maybe they wouldn't have broken up. or that he would have had more to work with regards to where she fell within their relationship or how she felt about the relationship. Either way, none of these things are major issues, but they do leave one with a negative feeling. They are kind of, again, the negative behaviors or messagings. And altogether, I think they are worth the points. Though none individually, I think would be worth the points. Together, they are, and that's a -2. And then the big one, which is our main relationship regression or breakup. And this, of course, has to do with Meredith and Derek, but also Christina and Burke. So we'll start with Meredith and Derek. So Meredith, of course, is drinking over Derek having a wife in the bar, and she tells this to Christina and George, with George basically spitting out his beer all over himself because he's in shock by it. Derek then, when she returns from the bar with Joe, tries to give her Joe's case, but she just says that she's drunk and she walks out. He tries to chase her, and as the good friends that they are, the interns all move into his way to try to stop him from following. Izzy, Christina, and George all do this, but he still follows her anyways. He follows her to the parking lot, and that is where she basically unleashes her anger and tells him that he has no idea how she feels because she is really trying very hard to stop herself from getting in her car and running him over. And he lets her walk away after that. We then, of course, have the whole episode where she is not interested in having any contact with Derek whatsoever. But then we have, while she's working with Addison, Addison commenting on the fact that she was the one who cheated, not Derek. And so Meredith goes to his trailer at the end of the episode and basically listens to his story. His story is essentially he was fine in the relationship with Addison. He comes home one day. Something feels off. He then makes his way through the house, realizing that there's nothing really off, but that he still feels off until he sees a men's jacket that is not his on the floor. And then he realizes that he recognizes that jacket. We then, then he then, sorry, he then says that he knows now that if he goes into his bedroom, he's not only going to find his wife cheating on him, but cheating on him with Mark, his best friend. And this is a little teaser of Mark's entry into the series, as this is his first mention. And she listens to the story, but in the end, she says that she basically wants to clarify who was she to her. Was she the rebound? Was she the someone that he was sleeping with? Like someone she's oh so okay. Her words, did he screw her because he got screwed? That is her words in the series. And he says that she was a breath of fresh air, that she saved him from drowning. And then she says that's not enough, and she leaves. Basically, she has broken up with him. But then we see Derek kind of in his trailer through one of the windows, and he, of course, is very upset by this, crying, not happy with the breakup. Our second main relationship regression or breakup that happens in this episode is, of course, the fact that Burke is, at first, he's reaching out to Christina. He goes in while she's memorizing some surgical instruments, and he basically asks her to dinner. He says, I see that we're both off tonight. I have a favorite restaurant. I've made reservations. Would you like to go to dinner with me? And she just basically tells him that the surgical room is where she goes to think, essentially rejecting him. They then, in the stairwell, she then approaches him to try to talk, and he basically moves to avoid her, and she confronts him about avoiding her. And then he basically asks her, "What do you want?" He's made dinner. She doesn't want to go to dinner. She doesn't want to talk. She doesn't want to do this, that, the other thing. She's avoiding him and basically keeps repeating, "What do you want?" And she, of course, says she doesn't know. She's obviously dealing with a lot behind the scenes. And he then tells her to figure it out before he leaves the stairwell. This, of course, is overseen by George. We then also have that he forcibly kisses her at this point, which, because they are in a sexual relationship, I don't know how I feel about that, but that also could apply to that negative messaging and behavior points that were taken off of the episode that I didn't mention at that point, but I also feel that it fits there. And of course, once she does go to him, and after the surgery, she goes to the on-call room to talk to him, and she's excited about the surgery, and then he says that they need to talk, and she says that they do. And what I get from her implications is that she was finally going to talk about the fact that she's pregnant, but he basically continues the conversation before she does, and what he wanted to talk about was the fact that they are both career driven, career focused. They don't have time to be in a relationship or to be doing what they're doing, and he thinks that they need to refocus on their careers and end what they've been doing, essentially dumping her, breaking up with her. Which she then goes to the bar and drinks with Meredith at the end of the episode, telling her that Burke had dumped her and that she is her person. And so, all of that being said, because it's two different relationships that have the breakups, unfortunately, this episode, well, it's only a 1 out of 10, which I feel very disappointed by, but this is why we have two lists. So I have made a mistake. I am not a mathematician, but I realized I minused 4 for the main relationship regressions instead of 3. So it's not a 1 out of 10 episode. It actually, that was fake news. It actually is a 3 out of 10 episode. Still disappointing though, but 3 out of 10 on our mostly objective ranking. And it is the first episode of the season, making it the only episode on our list. So by default, it falls into first place. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. All right, so with this series, I loved this episode because the thing I love about the series is not the medical side of things. I mean, I think that's interesting, but it's not what's interesting. I think that's interesting, but it's not what interests me. I like the drama, I like the relationships. I've mentioned this before. So, having said that, the first thing I actually want to call out is not related to that at all, but this title for the episode, the entire time I was watching the episode, the entire time I've been doing this presentation, I have had the song stuck in my head. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, because it is so catchy. And I feel like, in a sense, not in a way that's going to affect the score, but just in a sense, it kind of took away from the episode because the entire time I was watching the episode, I was thinking about the song and repeating the song inside of my head. I even had to pause it and play the song, hoping that would get it out of my head, and it did not. So, very catchy title that I just want to make sure everybody knows that this song is very catchy. Obviously, I loved the drama of the episode. I feel like it was very heavily focused more on all of the relationship dramas and the characters and their relationships versus the medical side of things, which I was like, finally. I also want to call out the fact that it feels so. Normally, my policy when I do these videos is to look at things from the audience perspective with just what we are shown on the screen. So, if there's background drama between co-stars, between like the production companies and blah blah blah, I don't mess with that. I don't care about it really. However, In this one case, because I feel like it affected the episode, I am going to point out that when I was looking up all of the episode titles, I looked on like the Grey's Anatomy wiki page, and it had pointed out that originally the first season was supposed to be longer, but it was cut short by the network, and then those episodes that were supposed to be at the end of season 1 were tacked on to season 2. And the reason I wanted to mention it in this one particular case was because I feel like you can really feel that when you're watching the episode. It really feels like a continuation of the previous episode, and it feels like you're building towards a finale, like a season finale, like even more so than season 1's season finale. This episode feels like you're basically building on that episode, heading towards a finale. And obviously, that was originally the case. That's why I wanted to mention it, because you can feel it when you're watching it. And it does feel like that. Like all the drama's coming to a head, all of the relationships are starting to struggle and meet their roadblocks and their barriers. And a lot of things from the previous season that were left open-ended and unresolved are now starting to be resolved and heading towards their resolutions, which again makes it feel like you're heading towards that finale, which really builds the tension and the enjoyment and entertainment level as an audience. Another call out was the fact that I don't like George as a character. Just in general, he never really grows on me as a character. However, in this one particular episode, I think he had a good role to play in this episode when he's, acting as the spy for Richard and just kind of awkwardly hovering around everywhere. The spewing the beer, the the spit take when Meredith shares the news that Derek was married, the awkward hovering around while he's watching all the gossip take place, the being an incredibly bad liar but still trying to keep the gossip away from Richard and not do his role as a spy that he's been tasked with. And just the fact that he's like a bad liar in general. And so basically everybody knows he knows things, but he's still stubbornly trying to hide it. And also the way that he does go above and beyond for Joe, finding the loophole that will allow him to not have to give up his bar to pay for his life-saving surgery. That was also very sweet. So I do feel that he did play a good role in this. It's also the fact that he does sort of out Christina to Meredith about Burke when they go to watch babies together. But as far as George as a not likable character goes, this episode he actually was pretty likable in, for however briefly it is. And then we have another moment that stuck out for me that I thought that made me laugh out loud, that I thought was great in this episode, was when Christina goes to check in on Joe. She basically, before the surgery, she basically walks in and immediately does like a U-turn into the bathroom, throws up, and then basically pretends nothing happened and goes and starts checking over Joe, who's just kind of staring at her like, okay. And it's a lot funnier than I describe it if you watch it. Obviously, the things that I had spoken about previously, they all do still apply from our mostly objective rankings, but contrary to the mostly objective rankings, I loved this episode. And even though the relationships are all crashing and burning, which is a negative on the mostly objective rank values, I personally am enjoying the drama. So for me, it actually is the first 10 out of 10 episode of Grey's Anatomy to date, and a strong start to the season overall. And of course, as our personal ranking so far shows, it is the first episode, therefore the only episode, and by default first place. Raindrops keep falling on my head. And that now finally brings us to our final segment of the video, where we do our series ranking so far, and this is where we are comparing each season against each other. So with season 2, we are starting with our mostly objective ranking, which was a 3 out of 270. And then a reminder that season 1 ended with 77.78%. We then have our personal ranking, and season 1 ended with 66.67% on the personal score. And with season 2, we're starting strong with 10 out of 270. So with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 1, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.